Automakers pulled off the biggest bait and switch in history, and over 4 million turbo engines are blowing up as proof. They ripped out the engines that lasted 300,000 miles, dropped in cheap turbocharged replacements, and charged more money for less machine. Those engines are now seizing on highways, catching fire in garages, and costing $12,000 apiece to replace. This was not an engineering mistake. This was the plan. The recalls are exploding across 4 major brands, and not one executive has lost a job. So how did an engine that fails with under 10,000 miles on the clock end up in almost every new car in America? And will this so-called error ever be fixed? Well, let's start with what they took from you. 20 years ago, an American engine was the one purchase you never had to think about. A Toyota pickup from the 90s would cross 300,000 miles with nothing but oil changes. Ford sold big, simple V8 engines that outlived the trucks wrapped around them. Families handed these vehicles down like heirlooms, from the dad who bought it new to the kid who drove it to college with 240,000 miles on the dash. Those engines were big, they were slightly thirsty, and they were nearly impossible to kill. There was no turbocharger bolted to the side, no extreme heat cooking the parts, no complicated plumbing waiting to fail. The engine was the boring part of the car, and boring was exactly what you were paying for. Mechanics in small-town repair shops would tell you the same thing over and over. Buy the simple engine, drive it forever. And the market agreed with them, because those old vehicles hold their value like nothing built today. A 20-year-old pickup with the original V8 and rust on the fenders will pull real money on any used lot in America right now, while 5-year-old vehicles with the new engines are getting traded in with dead powertrains and horror stories. That was the deal between American buyers and the car companies for half a century. You paid your money, and the machine held up its end. And the car companies knew that trust was worth billions, because reliability was the entire reason a family came back to the same showroom every 8 years. Which is what makes everything that happened next so hard to swallow. Because the companies did not lose that trust by accident. They traded it away, on purpose, for something they wanted more. This decision seemed small at the time. It wasn't. And the first crack showed up in the last place anyone expected. It showed up at Toyota. In 2024, Toyota recalled about 102,000 Tundra pickups and Lexus SUVs, because the factory left metal debris inside brand new engines. Not a sensor glitch, not a software patch. Metal shavings sitting inside the engine from the day it rolled off the line, grinding away until the whole thing locks up. Drivers reported engines dying in the middle of the highway with the family in the car. And Toyota's fix tells you how bad it really was. They did not repair those engines. They replaced them entirely. Tens of thousands of complete engine swaps on trucks that sometimes had under 10,000 miles on the odometer. An engine replacement is the most expensive fix in the entire industry, the kind of repair a company only chooses when there is no cheaper way out, and Toyota chose it for an entire fleet of trucks. I mean, think about that for a second. This is Toyota, the company that spent 50 years building the most boring, bulletproof reputation in the industry. Their new twin-turbo engine, the one that replaced their legendary V8, became the thing they had to rip out of customer trucks by the thousands. If the recall had stopped there, you could call it a one-time factory mistake. It didn't stop there. The problems around these new turbocharged Toyota engines kept generating complaints, investigations, and expansions, and owners on forums started asking the question nobody at headquarters wanted to answer. If Toyota cannot make this technology reliable, who can? Hold on to that question, because the answer is the whole story. But here's the detail that everyone missed at the time. Every automaker switched to this same technology in the same handful of years, almost like they were all following the same set of orders. And over at Ford, the exact same movie was already playing. Ford recalled roughly 90,000 trucks and SUVs because parts inside their turbocharged engines could crack apart and kill the engine on the spot. F-150 pickups, Broncos, Explorers, some of the best-selling vehicles in the country, stalling with no warning and no restart. And that was only one of Ford's turbo problems. Their smaller turbo engines, the ones in family SUVs like the Escape and the Bronco Sport, developed a habit that sounds almost too stupid to be real. The engine slowly drinks its own coolant. The fluid that is supposed to keep the engine cool leaks to where the fuel burns, and one morning the engine overheats, or misfires, or, in the worst documented cases, catches fire in the driveway. Owners filed class action lawsuits across the country over it, and Ford has been settling and extending coverage while new model years kept rolling off the line. And for the owner standing outside the warranty window, that failure means a repair bill that can clear $10,000 on a family SUV that is not even paid off yet. Meanwhile, a Ford dealer in suburban Atlanta will happily sell you a new SUV today with a direct descendant of that same engine family under the hood, and the salesman will call it proven technology with a straight face. That is the part that should make you angry. These are not different stories. Toyota, Ford. It is the same story wearing a different badge. New, small, turbocharged engines pushed into every driveway in America, failing in ways the old engines never did, at mileages the old engines would laugh at. If you're wondering how that's even legal, so is everyone else. And both of these companies are small players in this scandal compared to what comes next. Because one automaker did not just build a bad turbo engine, they built almost 4 million of them. And then they got caught hiding it. Hyundai and Kia. Their Theta family of engines, including the turbocharged versions and some of the best-selling SUVs and sedans in America, started seizing and catching fire years ago. Engines locking up at highway speed, cars burning in driveways and mall parking lots while the owners stood there watching. Federal regulators logged thousands upon thousands of complaints, including engine fires with no crash and no warning, the kind of failure that safety agencies treat as their highest alarm. The recalls eventually swallowed close to 4 million vehicles, which is where the number in this video's title comes from, and the complaints kept piling up in the federal database year after year, while the company issued software updates and NOx sensors instead of admitting what was actually wrong. And the only reason the public learned how deep it went is one man. A Hyundai engineer named Kim Gwang-ho got on a plane to Washington in 2016, carrying internal company documents, and he handed them to federal safety regulators. Those documents suggested the company knew more about the engine defect than it was telling anyone. The government eventually hit Hyundai and Kia with a $210 million penalty, and Kim was awarded over $24 million as the first auto industry whistleblower ever paid out by the safety agency. Honestly, the fact that it took a whistleblower flying across the Pacific with a briefcase of documents for anyone to act tells you everything about how this system protects you, which is to say, it doesn't. The class action settlement for owners ended up valued at around $1.3 billion. Sounds like justice, right? Keep that number in your pocket because in a few minutes, I'm going to show you what these companies actually paid compared to what they made, and the math is going to insult you. First, we need to answer the bigger question. Why did every automaker on Earth suddenly bet the farm on the same fragile technology at the same time?
The answer is a spreadsheet in Washington. In 2012, the federal government finalized fuel economy rules requiring automakers to hit a fleet average of 54.5 miles per gallon by 2025. President Obama announced it on stage, with the car company executive standing behind him, all smiles. And on paper, it sounds great. Who doesn't want to burn less gas? But the proven engines, the big, naturally breathing V8s and V6s that had earned 50 years of trust, could never hit those numbers. So the industry did the only thing that made the spreadsheet work. Shrink the engine, bolt a turbocharger to it, and tune it to shine on the government's laboratory test. The government's own data shows what happened next. In 2010, fewer than 3% of new vehicles in America had a turbocharged engine. Today, it is nearly half of everything sold. And in plenty of showrooms, you cannot drive out in a new model without one, because the old engine simply is not offered anymore. Full-size family SUVs now come with 4-cylinder engines smaller than what a 90s economy car carried, working twice as hard under twice the heat to move 3 tons of vehicle. It's like asking one guy to carry a couch up the stairs because the spreadsheet says 2 guys cost too much. Nobody asked the customer. There was no survey where American truck buyers begged for smaller, hotter, more complicated engines. These engines were built to pass a federal test cycle, and the buyer was never part of the equation. Call me old-fashioned, but when the entire industry replaces its most trusted product in a single decade to satisfy a regulation, somebody should have been asked to prove the new technology could survive 200,000 miles first. Nobody proved it. They shipped it. And the clock was already ticking. You just couldn't hear it yet. Now here is where the story stops being about regulations and starts being about greed. Because the automakers did not fight the mandate very hard, and there is a reason for that. A smaller engine with fewer cylinders is cheaper to build. Less metal, fewer parts, smaller factories. The mandate handed every automaker a golden excuse to put less engine in your car. So did your price go down? You already know the answer. The average new vehicle in America sold for around $30,000 in 2012. Today, it is knocking on $50,000. You paid more and got less machine. And the fuel savings that justified this entire experiment? Independent testing has repeatedly found that these small turbo engines often burn more fuel in real-world driving than their window stickers promise. Because the moment you load them up, tow with them, or drive them like a normal human being, the turbo forces them to gulp gas like the big engines they replaced. Truck owners figured this out the hard way, watching the fuel gauge fall off a cliff the first time they hooked up a trailer, getting worse mileage under load than the old V8 they traded away. It's like paying extra for a diet plan that only works while you are standing still. So walk through what actually happened here. The government wrote a number on a spreadsheet. The industry used that number as cover to cut manufacturing costs, charge you more, and ship engine technology that had never been tested at this scale across an entire country. And the fuel economy, the one benefit you were promised in exchange for all this risk, mostly shows up in a laboratory and not in your driveway. That is not a green revolution. That is a cost-cutting program wearing a green costume. And my honest opinion is that every executive who signed off on it knew exactly which one it was. And now we get to the part I promised you. What happened when they all got caught?
Nothing happened.
That is the climax of this story, and I wish I were joking. Add up the punishment. Hyundai and Kia paid a $210 million federal penalty, while pulling in well over $100 billion a year in revenue. For a company that size, that is not a punishment. That is a rounding error on a Tuesday. The $1.3 billion class settlement came with no admission of wrongdoing, which means legally, officially, nobody did anything wrong to 4 million families. Ford settles its coolant lawsuits and keeps selling the descendants of the same engines. Toyota swaps engines under recall, and the same basic design goes right back into next year's trucks. Recalls get filed quietly in a federal database on Friday afternoons, where no normal person will ever read them. And the announcement letter that lands in your mailbox months later is written so softly you would think they were recalling a cup holder instead of the thing keeping your family moving at highway speed. And then came the twist that should be front-page news everywhere. Over the July 4th weekend of 2025, Washington passed a law that set the fine for missing fuel economy targets at $0. Zero. The mandate that pushed these fragile engines into your driveway no longer even has a penalty attached to it. The companies got their cheap engines, the government got its spreadsheet victory, and when the rules became inconvenient, the rules simply evaporated. For them, never for you. Your engine is still in your driveway. And in March of 2026, a federal judge sanctioned Hyundai and Kia in the ongoing engine litigation after finding evidence had been destroyed. That is where we are. The receipts were so damaging that a court says some of them got shredded. And somehow, it gets worse. Because when one of these engines finally dies, I need you to see exactly who gets handed the bill. Picture a retired postal carrier in western Michigan. She bought her SUV new, believed the ads about it being the smart, efficient choice, and did every oil change on schedule. At 81,000 miles, 2 years out of warranty, the engine let go on the interstate with her grandkids in the back. No crash, thank God, just a dead machine coasting to the shoulder. The quote from a dealer in Grand Rapids came to $12,400 for a replacement engine, and the warranty claim went nowhere because one oil change receipt from an independent shop was missing. That story is a composite, but the federal complaint database is stuffed with thousands of reports exactly like it, and the $12,000 engine quote is now completely ordinary. Replacing one of these small turbocharged engines routinely costs more than the entire value of the vehicle it sits in, which means a paid-off car becomes scrap metal the moment the engine lets go. That is the system working as designed. The mandate came from Washington, the cost-cutting came from Detroit and Seoul, the settlements came with no guilt attached, and the only person in the entire chain who actually pays full price is the one person who never had a vote. The average buyer just wanted what their parents had, a plain, honest machine that starts every single morning and keeps starting for 20 years. Instead, they were sold a science experiment with a payment book, and next year's model will roll out with the same experiment under a new name. Because every incentive in this system says quiet recalls are cheaper than honest engineering. This pattern is not unique to one brand, and that is exactly the point. When every company fails the same way and nobody pays, it stops being a defect and starts being a business model. The Hyundai and Kia engine case heads back into federal court later this year, and after that evidence ruling, the paper trail is going to be ugly. Subscribe so you get that breakdown from me before the settlement lawyers bury it.